I am with Jamie Brown right now, and she is a 6th grade teacher at East. And when we had met one time earlier in the year, we were conferencing after a walkthrough. I asked how was she asking her kids to track student feedback, or how was she asking them to like goal set, especially after the prompts. And so I wanted her to explain a little bit some of the strategies she's used, and you're going to hear her kind of point and talk through what she has done. So go ahead and talk us through it, Jamie.
After their first quarterly prompt that we did after first quarter, sat through and I graded through them, and then for this first one, which is on the purple conference card, I sat down with them, I shared with them their prompt, we had a one-on-one conversation. I had them write down the scores that they earned for all 6 of the traits, and then I sat down with them and I talked about, okay, for next time, what would you want your scores to be? And I encouraged them to be realistic and to maybe pick 1 or 2 traits to either improve upon, or even for some kids just maintain, especially when they're high like this particular student.
That's what I was just going to say. They're a high score, so this is one of your stronger writers.
Correct.
Anyways. Okay, awesome.
So I encouraged this particular student, pick 1 or 2 areas that you wanted to improve upon, and then be more specific down at the bottom. What are some specific ways that you could achieve the scores that you set for yourself? And so he told himself that he wanted to make sentences different varieties of lengths. He said, put down more voice in my writing, and then he said spelling and punctuation mistakes fixed. So one thing we talked about with him was going back and rereading through your work just to make sure. That then led us to the second time, and as I said in the first time, we did it one-on-one. The second time, that I did realize that was very time consuming, and while I found it somewhat beneficial, I decided to try something different the second time, and I actually just handed all prompts back to the students at the same times, and I made sure the second prompt that I gave very specific comments as if I were talking to them. And then I had them again write down their scores, say what they wanted to get for their final prompt of the year, that third full process prompt that we'll look at, and then do the same thing again. And even though I didn't do this with them one-on-one, they asked me very good questions. We had like a discussion session. I even had them kind of look at each other's and pull out things that they felt like that they needed to improve upon.
And how do you think, after the third prompt, how do you think you're going to go about having them dig into their data and reflect or goal set? Because the third prompt is going to come up in January, and they're still going to have almost half of the year still to be focusing on writing. So any thoughts on what to do after that one?
Yeah, I would kind of like to give them back their first prompt, actually, like the actual prompt itself before their third one, just to see where they were, where they have been, and then maybe this one to really show where they've gone. But for this last one, I think that really just kind of talking about these, showing some examples. One of the main things we're working on right now is ideas and organization. So just really reviewing like what makes good ideas, what makes writing have good organization. I think just reviewing those things that we talk about all the time with them before their final prompt.
What are you said right now you're working on ideas and organization. What kind of a writing piece are the kids working on now? And it's December 10th, and they just got this back on December 11th. So December 1st. So talk to me a little bit about how you use the goal setting from the prompt and how that's driving instruction or conversations with the kids in the writing they're doing right now.
Not this particular student, but for most students, their lowest score was ideas and organization. We talked about how you need to stick to the prompt, and so with this essay we're currently writing right now in class is expository. One of the main things that's been driving like our mini lessons and writing time is making sure I have a topic sentence, and then making sure that I have enough support in the details, but also that those details relate back to that specific topic sentence. Because what I found in the last prompt is they had support, but it wasn't relevant support.
And so one of the things that you can see too, and then I'm going to wrap up Jamie, she's done awesome, is you can see even like here's an anchor chart where after talking with the kids and seeing the different areas, so she's got this anchor chart here which just mimics exactly what you just said, and how you were teaching the kids to try to improve in some of those areas for ideas. So very cool, Jamie. Thank you for sharing this strategy with us. Okay, so I asked Megan, who is a 7th grade teacher at West, to kind of talk through a little bit of how she is having the kids keep track of their own writing data, and then how she's also tracking different information she gets out of writing conferences this year. So Megan, why don't you go ahead and start by telling us what you're having the kids keep track of, and then we'll get into what you keep track of for your writing conferences.
Okay, so this year I decided to have the students track their scores for each of the writing prompts and keep that in their binder all year. So when I collected the second prompt this time, they got this sheet out and turned it in with their prompt, so that when I was done grading them, I wrote their scores on the sheet and handed it back to the kids. And they were able to see whether they grew in each area.
Awesome. Do you do the same when they take SRI as well?
Yeah, and for SRI, they set a goal for what they want their next score to be, and then they talk about like how they're going to achieve that goal by reading more or reading more challenging books.
Very cool. High school teachers, SRI is just it's basically like a quick reading test that all of our middle schoolers can and most do take, and then that is a way that we get a reading level, so that we can kind of know if they're on grade level or not with reading. Okay, cool. What's this little orange help guy? What do you do with that?
Well, this is something I used more at the beginning of the year. Students will get one of these and keep it in their writing journal, and they're able to write down things that they can work on if they get stuck, and I'm busy helping another student. So this shows me that they need help, but they can keep working while they're waiting, so they're not just stuck and wasting time. I stopped using it as much because I like to be in control of who I conference with, and I've made it a point to get up in between conferences and check to see if anyone needs help during that time.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. I noticed you have a timer out. What do you use the timer for?
I set the timer depending on how many students I'm conferencing with, just to keep us on track, so that I'm not taking up too much time with any one student or any one group of students. It just keeps things moving.
Awesome. So we started talking about conferencing, and I've noticed that you've got little note cards in containers, and you have a notebook here. Talk to us about what these note cards are.
Well, last year I was trying to figure out a system for keeping track of my conferencing notes, and this is what I used. And I wrote little conference starters just in case I couldn't think of something to get the conference started. I would use this as my little cheat sheet. And then I also was working on trying to remember how to do positive feedback, like one positive and one thing to work on. And sometimes it's you get stuck and you feel like you're saying the same positives to all the students. So this was, again, my little cheat sheet. So I kept that in the front of every box, but then each student had a card, and I would write down the date and the notes from each conference on there.
Awesome. But this year...
Yeah, I decided to switch this year because I felt limited on my space, how much I could write on the note cards. So I switched to just like a journal and like a tab for each class. So in the front of the journal, I wrote down mini lesson ideas when I'm conferencing, and something keeps coming up, then I know I need to do a lesson on it, so I can write it in here. So this is narrative, expository, argumentative. These are the skills that I noticed that we were needing
Very smart.
more help. And then these are just miscellaneous ones. And then each class has a little tab, and this helps me make sure that I'm getting to conference with different students each time around. And I'll put the name of the assignment that we're working on or the skill that we're working on that day.
And so again, when you're conferencing with these kids, for the most part, this is you choosing, you selecting them.
Right.
This isn't the kids who are raising their hands with needing help. And do you do individual conferences or do you group conference?
I am starting to do more and more group conferences because I felt like I could never get around to everybody individually. So the group conferences have worked out really well. The students can kind of give each other advice, and that's working out really well this year.
Okay, awesome. Having tried both methods, thinking about the rest of this year and or next year, do you think you'd stick with the notebook in this system?
I think I will stick with the notebook, and I think I'm going to add like a class list to it instead of just putting the names here. That way I can kind of check off who I've conferenced with and see who's left over so that I can make sure I can get to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Megan. You gave us a lot to think about. This is Colette Nicolini, and she is one of our 9th grade teachers at the high school, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about how she has asked kids to goal set on their own and how she has helped them track their progress with those goals in their writing. So go ahead and talk us through what you've got, Colette.
Awesome. So at the beginning of the year, we gave all of our students in Pre-AP English 9 a writing goal packet. And basically how we set it up is the front page is the why. Why are we doing this, and what should they take out of it? The second page was where they created their 3 goals for the year. And they created their 3 goals based on their feedback from the B1 prompt, as well as their prior knowledge of what they struggled with and what their areas of growth were or needed to be. We also had them identify strengths so that they knew what they were good at already, and tried to target at least one trump trait on the rubric. So either ideas, organization, or conventions had to be one of the 3 goals. On the next page, we decided to include bar graphs for them so that throughout the year they could track, and you can't really see it here, but there's percentages. They could track their percentage scores and see how they fluctuated depending on the assignment. So maybe on the narrative they scored higher than argumentative writing, which later on would give them feedback on if they needed to tweak their goals or not, if there was a certain style of writing they needed to work on more. The last page, and they have multiple in their packets at this point, but this is our reflection page. So anytime they get a writing assignment back, they fill out the top, what was the assignment, when was it due, what was my score, and then they write down their scores for whatever writing traits they were assessed on, and then they reflect on their 3 goals. So how did I do on this goal? What would I change or work on differently for next time? So if they met the goal, I always tell them, what did you do to meet that goal, and how can you keep challenging yourself? If you didn't meet your goal, what went wrong and what would you do differently on the next one? So, do you want to look at a filled out one?
Yeah, let's look at a filled out one.
Okay, so this is one of my pre-AP students. And one thing I was going to say, but I'll point it out now, that I noticed in using the B1 prompts as their starting point is that so many of them focused on specific scores. So one thing I would suggest if you're going to do something like this is give them a variety of writing samples, not just a timed writing prompt, because they all focused on, I want to score a 5 in word choice, instead of it being more specific and targeted to one criteria in a writing trait. But here's one of my students, and we tried to make it so that they had very specific goals with a specific target and a specific time frame. So here are his 3 goals.
When they were, when you were having them write their goals, did you find that you had to show them examples of did you have to teach them how to write their goals?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that was, that took a couple days of class time to do the PowerPoint. We went through a PowerPoint that outlined what SMART goals were. We wrote a class goal together. We evaluated different goals for their strength. And then as they were writing, it really did take an entire class period to go through and conference with them as they were writing to make sure they were on the right track and that their goals were specific and measurable.
Great.
So definitely, if you're going to use this strategy, it does take some time at the front end, but it's definitely worth it. So here are his goals, and here's his bar graph. He's been slacking on that, we can see. You can see here too, he also created new goals because he was successful in the original goals he had created. So I encouraged them throughout the semester, if they just found that they weren't challenged enough by him, to go back and create new ones.
Yeah.
So that's kind of nice. Here's one of his first reflections. So, let's see. I had strong paragraphs. Next time I will do exactly what. So this is one pitfall. When they meet what they need to meet, they like to be lazy and just say, I will do exactly what I did last time, or I achieved mastery. So you really have to push them to identify how they're going to challenge themselves if they met their goal. Do they need to change their goal? Do they need to push themselves to try to score higher? Let's see, what else? So for some of them, this was their literary analysis essay. And throughout kind of tracking it, it's kind of cool because they have constructed response essays, their narrative, and then I asked them to keep all of them in the back. So now for this next semester, originally we were going to do year-long goals, but they haven't really been challenging enough, I think, at this point. So the start of next semester, we're gonna have them look at all their writing, look at their reflections, and create new goals to challenge them for the new semester. Definitely takes a lot of coaching and conferencing, and we've definitely had some bumps in the road with not knowing what a good goal looked like, and then having to go back and change them. And even the kids themselves, when I asked for feedback, wanted the opportunity to create new goals for the new semester now that they had a bit better idea of where we were headed. But I've definitely seen improvement, and they're definitely more aware. They pull these out before they start an assignment and kind of review their goals, and then keep that in mind when they do the assignment. So
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
you're welcome.
So I'm here with Sarah O'Keefe, and she's one of our 10th grade teachers at the high school. And Sarah's going to talk us through how she helps kids look at their writing when they're done and respond to their strengths and weaknesses, and then how she also has them track what they've done. So go ahead, Sarah.
All right, so my writing process is pretty much after I grade papers, and while I'm grading papers, I keep a running list of things that I just notice as kind of common weaknesses between the kids. And what I do after I pass back the test is I usually put up 3 strong things, focus on the positive, and then 3 things I want the class in general to work on. I also go through my stronger student essays and find those 3 things I want people to work on that some students have done really well, and I create kind of like anchor posters around the room for a gallery walk activity, so that once I pass back their essays, the kids on their own take time to reflect. We do that usually the first day when the essays come back, and they talk about something they're really good at, something they felt like they, impacted their grade, whether it was like maybe they were absent a lot, or maybe they didn't read the rubric carefully, but something where they looked at their paper and they were like, oh yeah. Their opinion of their grade, some kids get a B and they're like elated, where others get a B and they're not very happy. So it kind of helps me see their own goal setting for themselves, and then an area of improvement. And then usually the day later, or a couple days later, we do the gallery walk activity, and what I just have them do is they go around the room and they look at the different areas that I wanted them to take notice of, an area that I like to see growth, and had them reflect on what those exemplary student essays did really well. And after they do that, then I have them go back to their seats and look back at their paper and think about seeing those other, peer examples, what now they want to try to do even better on their next essay. So that's kind of my process, and I have the kids keep everything in their binder so that then when they do their next piece, they can look back at how they did on their first one and see like, oh yeah, I didn't proofread that last paper very carefully and it impacted my grade. I need to make sure to do that, or I need to make sure that my minor claims are more clear. So helping them stay organized so that they can use their kind of past lessons as resources for the future is something I try to do.
Awesome. Any tips for anybody who plans on maybe trying this or starting this? Any tips on how to get started?
I would say think small. Don't try to get too many goals for kids. I feel like 3 things to work on is a good area. You can come up with a running list of tons and tons of errors, but I try to really reflect back on the assignment itself, what information I gave them ahead of time about the assignment, so that then when I'm giving them feedback, they're not so overwhelmed that they don't even know where to begin, but instead they've got some really specific areas to work on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Okay, so this is Justin Bretz, and he is one of our dual credit teachers. He also teaches AP Lit, and he teaches English 12. So he's going to talk to us a little bit about how he gives feedback and comments electronically, which I know a variety of our teachers are doing this as well. And then he's going to talk to you about how he has the kids reflect on the comments they get on their papers. Go ahead, Justin.
Thank you. Well, I have my students, number 1, submit directly to Schoology. A couple of reasons why I think electronic grading is the best. Number 1, it saves me from packing around lots of pieces of paper. And number 2, it also allows me the ability to give comments that students can actually read. If I wrote them, they would be a mess. So typically when I do some commenting, I use predominantly Microsoft Word for my comments. I like to use inline comments to let my students sort of know some of the various items that stand out to me in those moments that I feel like they need to be aware of in that moment. For instance, this essay that we're taking a look at now, I was grading at the time specifically a lot with MLA documentation, a skill we'd spent time considerably on, and so I wanted to let students know as I was going through the essay where I saw moments where the documentation could have been stronger, where the format was incorrect, or some items like that. So you'll see me using that throughout. Other things, you know, it's sort of just use those as needed and kind of decide from there. But the biggest thing I do is I got this from Melinda Lowry. She told me that some research was done that says students respond better to a letter at the end of an essay than they do to some inline commenting. So I started writing my students just a short little letter, somewhere between 2 and 3 paragraphs long, just letting them know, number one, starting off what I liked about their writing, what was going well, what I thought was working, what they should kind of continue building on, things like that. And then I usually take a couple of paragraphs or one and maybe a couple of sentences to give them some feedback on what they can improve for the future. And then they kind of have that all in a nice, neat little package that's coherent and makes sense from there. So that's the biggest things that I kind of work with whenever I'm using my grading and how I do it electronically.
Awesome. So now the kids get this back. Sydney gets this back. And what is Sydney asked to do with it?
Okay, well, Sydney's going to get this back, and she's going to review not only the inline comments in the letter, but she's also going to review the rubric, which will provide her some additional information and scoring. But then she's expected to turn around and go to Schoology basically, or anywhere electronically, and take some time and just reflect on the feedback. I found that allowing them a little bit of time to process the feedback they got is sort of helping them build stronger connections throughout what they're doing, as opposed to just sort of giving them back, letting them grumble about it maybe, and things like that. So they're expected to identify some areas for growth within that composition and for where they would like to go next with some things. And one of the best things that I started to do with this too is I have my students quite often then take the list that they develop, use it as an editing revision checklist for their next essay, and then they copy and paste that into the next essay. And then I give them feedback on the things that they said they needed to work on, so that they've got directed specific feedback to help them through that process. I don't have an example up right now of that, but that's one of the kind of positives of this, is that I can use that, what they identified as something they need to work on, and make that then something I give them feedback on, so that they are getting the feedback they want.
Awesome. Is there anything about this that you would change for next year, or any other tips that you would give to any of the teachers and how to go about implementing this, or any other little tricks that you've learned along the way?
The biggest thing is to be very intentional. In the past, when I feel like I've done it, sometimes I've just, sort of said, oh, do this when you get a chance. Now I sort of specifically make them do it in class. I give them like 20 to 30 minutes when they get essays back to finish this process. I ask that they be as quiet as possible, focus in on those items, and really use that time to kind of process, think critically about the feedback they received and how to work with it from there. So I think the biggest thing I can ever recommend is be very intentional about your process, and also make sure your students understand the process of their feedback they're getting. Before, I would just sort of give it back without sort of instructions for what to look at, how to look at it, and I didn't think that they were always sort of understanding what they should see or what they should do with that. So also be very sure that students understand how you gave feedback, and that they understand what they should look for in your feedback.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you.
I just want to share the strategy that I decided to try out this year. 2 years ago, when I had a co-teach section, my co-teacher and I tried to do group conferencing a lot. That was something that I loved. And one of the ways that we kept track of the feedback was we used note cards, like Megan talked about. It was nice when I was co-teaching because I could easily take a stack, she could take a stack, and it was really simple. It was an easy way for us to keep track of what we were writing down. Well, this year I don't have a co-teach section, but with my seniors, I still wanted an easy, quick way that I could keep track of the feedback I was giving them. So what I have is just a binder, and I have everybody's names on there, and each student has a page, and then you can just see how I have strength and improvement, the date, and I can keep track of feedback that I'm giving. Josie had a creative hook. She needed to add the summary of her book. That was one thing that we talked about, and I can keep track of any of the feedback that I'm trying to give them. So I could keep multiple sections in the binder if I wanted, and really this is just a way for me to track when I've conference with kids or what kind of positives and negatives that I am seeing. So again, just another strategy